In the world of video games, the post-apocalypse has long been a familiar backdrop for stories about survival, moral choices, and the struggle for resources. However, each new attempt to revive this genre requires not only original setting, but also boldness in realization of ideas. Atomfall from British studio Rebellion is just such an experiment. Inspired by the real 1957 nuclear disaster in Windscale, now Cumbria, England, the game takes us to an alternate reality, where instead of radiation, there's a mysterious sci-fi MacGuffin, and the quarantine zone is filled not with fire and ash, but with idyllic landscapes, fire-breathing robots, and mysterious cults. Rebellion, known for the Sniper Elite series with its cinematic Nazi assassinations, here takes a step away from a clearly defined formula. Atomfall bills itself as a survival action game with elements of detective, RPG, and 1950s retrofuturism. But can the mixture of such different ingredients create a harmonious cocktail? Alas, the game teeters on the edge of ambition and compromise. It offers exciting investigations reminiscent of classic quests and atmospheric locations, but stumbles over superficial mechanics, formulaic characters, and indecision in the choice of genre direction. This is a story not about the end of the world, but about what lurks behind its scenes. Here, you will not just survive, but unravel a tangle of conspiracies, face betrayal, and make decisions, the consequences of which will appear hours later. But can Atomfall overcome the legacy of Fallout and Stalker, or will its own identity dissolve into borrowed ideas? The answer lies in the delicate balance between fascinating mysteries and unrealized potential. Atomfall is set in an alternate version of Cumbria, England, inspired by the real-life 1957 nuclear incident, the Windscale fire. Instead of the usual radiation apocalypse, however, Rebellion offers a sci-fi twist. The disaster here is caused by a mysterious MacGuffin, and the quarantine zone, isolated for 5 years, has become a strange hybrid of idyll and nightmare. Green pastures, dense forests, and rolling hills reminiscent of the English countryside are juxtaposed with fire-breathing robots, deadly flora, and bandit gangs. This contrast is a key feature of the setting. The world seems peaceful, but around every corner there is a threat, be it Vikaverse-inspired cultists or automated guards patrolling the ruins of retro-futuristic 1950s buildings. The plot revolves around an amnesiac protagonist devoid of his past and colorful character traits. His goal is to uncover the truth about the disaster and escape from the quarantine zone, which, despite its outer beauty, becomes a picturesque prison. Instead of linear quests, the game offers a system of clues. The player independently explores the world, finding clues in letters, dialogues, or randomly discovered locations. For example, an abandoned building can lead to a secret bunker, and a conversation with a survivor can reveal the threads of a conspiracy linking scientists, officials, and local fanatics. These investigations are Atomfall's strongest suit. Unraveling the web of lies, the player's faced with moral dilemmas. Betray an ally for information, enter into a temporary alliance with the enemy, or risk his life to save a stranger. However, due to the emptiness of the protagonist, even meaningful choices lose weight. They do not form a personality, but remain abstract options in the dialogue menu. The centerpiece of the world becomes the Unleash, a giant underground complex that connects all the game's zones. It is a labyrinth of corridors, laboratories, and fortifications, with a gloomy atmosphere reminiscent of Black Mesa from Half-Life or Metro tunnels. Here, the player solves puzzles with energy systems, activating doors, disabling turrets, or unwittingly unleashing deadly rats. Progression in Unleashed is cyclical. Tools and knowledge found open new paths, creating a Metroidvania effect. By the end of the game, these dungeons become almost native, but their grim aesthetic contrasts with the superficial elaboration of the rest of the world. Despite the intriguing details, Atomfall's setting suffers from a lack of depth. The retro-futurism of the 1950s is reduced to the setting, posters, technology, and architecture, but doesn't carry satire or social commentary like Fallout. Cults and conspiracies are mentioned in passing, and the static weather perpetual sunshine, no night, robs the world of dynamics. Even dangers like poison gas or sponge monsters, resistant to damage but not difficult to fight, don't create the tension inherent to the survival genre. In the end, Atomfall is a mystery game where the investigations and dungeon atmosphere are exciting. But the overall picture remains a mosaic of unrealized ideas. The setting could have been a unique synthesis of history and sci-fi, but Rebellion lacked the courage to delve into its potential, leaving the player to wander the beautiful but barren hills of post-apocalyptic England. Atomfall's gameplay is an attempt to combine freedom of exploration, detective investigations, and survival elements, but the result is uneven. The game offers an open world divided into 5 zones, including vast fields, forests, and a large-scale underground complex. The key feature becomes a system of clues, replacing traditional quests. Instead of clear instructions, the player searches for clues by himself, studying letters, eavesdropping on conversations, exploring abandoned buildings, or accidentally stumbling upon hiding places. For example, a diary found in the ruins can point to a secret laboratory, and a dialogue with a survivor can reveal the connection between cultists and scientists. This creates the illusion of detective work, where each discovery brings you closer to unraveling the main plot. However, the system suffers from a lack of depth. Many clues are reduced to linear chains of tasks, and their consequences rarely extend beyond localized changes. The combat mechanics combine elements of shooter and stealth action, but doesn't excel in either genre. Long-range combat is functional but boring. Human enemies die from a single headshot, which adds realism, but the scarcity of ammo and the monotony of the firearm arsenal, pistols, rifles, quickly turn firefights into a chore. Close combat is disappointing. The lack of dodges, blocks, or combos turns fights into primitive rolling backwards with stabs. The situation is aggravated by the AI. Enemies ignore the player behind a transparent fence or pursue him with unexpected persistence. Monsters are especially problematic. They attack without tactics, compensating for the lack of complexity with a huge amount of health, which stretches fights to tedious damage sponge beaters. Stealth in Atomfall is the most controversial system. Technically, you can only hide in tall grass, but in practice, the player often disappears from the enemy's field of vision by simply stepping round a corner or standing by a window. This creates comical situations when bandits unsuccessfully search for you a meter away from their noses. However, the mechanics are unstable. Sometimes stealth suddenly breaks, and you are attacked by all the surrounding enemies, which ruins the immersiveness. Crafting and survival are the weakest elements of the game. The crafting system is limited to basic items: bandages, Molotov cocktails, temporary skill boosters. Weapons cannot be modified, and resources for creating items are so abundant that the need to search for them disappears after a couple of hours. Survival is reduced to rare areas with poisonous gas, where you need to wear a gas mask, and to pointless scanning the area with a metal detector. It does not add tension, but only slows down the pace. Even the weather, perpetually sunny and static, lacks dynamics. There are no storms or night darkness, making the world flat and predictable. Progression and RPG elements are virtually absent. Skills, which can be unlocked through found books or injections, are reduced to trivial improvements, like plus 10% to radiation resistance, or silent kills. They don't change the style of the game, don't unlock new abilities, and are quickly forgotten. Dialogue choices, despite moral dilemmas, betray an ally or save a stranger, do not affect the plot globally because of the emptiness of the amnesic protagonist. The Junction is the only place that stands out from the crowd. This underground labyrinth connecting all locations is filled with energy redistribution puzzles. The player activates shields, disables traps, or redirects the current to open new paths. To go further, you often need to return with new knowledge or tools. This creates a pleasant sense of progression, reminiscent of Metroidvania. The atmosphere of gloomy corridors, emergency sirens, and random encounters with monsters evokes Half-Life and Metro, but it's not there beyond similar depth. As a result, Atomfall's gameplay is a collection of interesting ideas that Rebellion didn't dare to develop to its full potential. The detective investigations and underground puzzles are exciting, but the boring combat, simplistic crafting, and lack of RPG depth leave it feeling unfinished. The game tries to please fans of different genres, but in the end it fails to find its unique niche, remaining a cute but superficial experiment. Atomfall's visual style is a mixture of nostalgic retro-futurism of the 1950s and idyllic landscapes of the English countryside. Green pastures, dense forests, and hills, reminiscent of pictures of rural England, create a paradoxical contrast with the post-apocalyptic setting. Instead of scorched wastelands, the lush colors of nature reign here, making the world of the game unusually alive for the genre. However, this beauty is deceptive. Fire-breathing robots in the style of vintage science fiction magazines lurk among the meadows, and deadly plants and bandit ambushes lurk in the shadows of trees. The architecture retains the spirit of the 1950s. Bunkers with rounded shapes, advertising posters with an atomic aesthetic, machinery reminiscent of early experiments with nuclear energy. But all of this remains mere decoration. Rebellion doesn't use retrofuturism for satire or social commentary as Fallout does, limiting itself to a superficial recreation of the era. The game's atmosphere bifurcates between the cozy danger of the surface and the grim claustrophobia of the dungeons. Ground locations, despite patrolling robots and cultists, seem almost peaceful. There are no radioactive storms, night, or dynamic weather. The sun shines forever and the grasslands remain unchanged, which takes away the world's sense of chaos and survival. But the Underground Unleashed completely overturns this perception. Labyrinths of half-destroyed laboratories, flickering emergency lights, creaking mechanisms, and crushing silence remind the best moments of Half-Life and Metro. Here, the atmosphere reaches the peak of tension. Every step is accompanied by the risk of activating a trap or waking a monster, and puzzles with energy redirection add layers of strategy. However, if you step out of the underground, Atomfall's world seems static and unfinished. The lack of day and night changes, monotonous biomes, and predictable enemy patrols reduce immersiveness. Even the masked cultists inspired by Vicovers or retro automatons, despite the original design, don't get enough elaboration. Their motives and history remain vague. Visual details like vintage cars or abandoned cafes add charm, but not depth. In the end, Atomfall's graphics are pleasing to the eye with lush landscapes and stylization, and the dungeons prove that Rebellion is capable of creating atmospheric locations. However, the overall setting suffers from unrealized potential. The world looks nice but doesn't breathe, and the unique 1950s aesthetic remains a backdrop for unfinished ideas. Rebellion's Atomfall is a game that balances between ambitious ideas and their incomplete realization, giving the impression of an unfinished experiment. On the one hand, the project stands out for its unconventional approach to post-apocalyptic setting, abandoning cliched wastelands in favor of picturesque English landscapes filled with retro-futuristic aesthetics. The idea of weaving a real historical disaster, the Windscale Fire, into a sci-fi context is commendable, as is the emphasis on detective investigations instead of linear quests. The clue system, where the player assembles the puzzle of the conspiracy themselves by exploring the world and interacting with characters, adds a freshness to the genre, reminiscent of classic quests with their emphasis on logic and observation. Underground Complex becomes a prime example of what Rebellion is capable of. Its dark atmosphere, energy redistribution puzzles, and Metroidvania-esque approach to progression prove that the studio knows how to create tense, layered locations. However, these virtues are overblown by a number of systemic and narrative blunders. The setting, despite its originality, remains a setting. The retro-futurism of the 1950s is not used for satire or deep social analysis. Cults and conspiracies are mentioned in passing, and the static world with eternal sunshine lacks the dynamics inherent in survival. Gameplay suffers from eclecticism. Borrowed mechanics from Fallout, stalker and survival genres do not add up to a coherent system. Combat encounters, whether monotonous shootouts or primitive melee combat quickly become boring, and stealth works so unpredictably that it feels more like a bug than a feature. Progression and RPG elements are reduced to formalities, while crafting and survival are routine activities with no strategic value. Even moral choices that could have added depth are lost against the backdrop of an empty, amnesiac protagonist whose decisions form neither a personality nor a unique story path. Atomfall's main problem is the studio's fear of making bold moves. Rebellion clearly sought to please different audiences by mixing genres, but ultimately didn't delve into any of them. The game feels like a collection of interesting sketches that never became finished paintings. It could have become iconic if it had focused on its strengths. Detective investigations, interchanges atmosphere, and socio-political undertones of historical inspiration. Instead, Atomfall remains a cute but superficial adventure that will be remembered for individual moments rather than a holistic experience. For fans of Rebellion, especially fans of Sniper Elite with its clear focus on sniper action, Atomfall may disappoint with its lack of authorial writing. However, fans of atmospheric dungeons and unhurried investigations will find plenty of reasons to spend hours here. Ultimately, the game shows potential that unfortunately was never realized. It serves as a reminder that ambition must be backed by courage. Without it, even the most original ideas run the risk of being a mere shadow of possible greatness.